This course touches on a tremendous amount of information, and it's worthwhile to take a moment to try to conceptualize and understand everything we've talked about so we have that firmer understanding going forward. I've mentioned CPT, cognitive processing therapy. I've mentioned CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I mentioned prolonged exposure, PE. There's another type of treatment that's often utilized for trauma, EMDR. And this is a type of treatment that really helps us become more grounded while processing the trauma. EMDR stands for eye movement and desensitization reprocessing. And it's another approach to treating trauma. It involves some of those components of prolonged exposure, PE, and incorporates a significant amount of grounding. It's not a particular treatment that I'm trained in, but some clinicians are trained in it, and they can provide a lot of support to you if you decide that that's best for you. It's a type of treatment I'll encourage you to read about online and try to make sure you understand that one as well. It may be beneficial to back up, though, to become more broad. I mentioned CBT. CBT really taps into our thoughts. It taps into the way we're thinking, whether it's accurate, whether it's functional. It's more of that ground level skill. CBT is trying to ensure that we really can link our thoughts with our emotions in all types of situations, but we can also start to do this deeper processing. We're going to notice some thoughts that are very routine, and we can look at this like an iceberg. If you think about that part above the water, this is the smallest portion of the iceberg, most visible, the most accessible. These are those automatic thoughts. These are the thoughts or beliefs that are rattling around throughout the day. Our mind, it wants to think. We're not going to stop it from thinking. These beliefs we might notice when we're walking home from work or going to meet a friend. Thoughts about what we're going to do for dinner, if we have food in the fridge. They may seem very benign, but there's a lot of thoughts in there that are happening that we may not give attention to. Some thoughts pertain to us. Some thoughts pertain to how we see ourselves, how we see others. Those are those automatic thoughts, and they happen regularly. If we go beneath the surface of the iceberg, if we get below the water, we're in the middle. We're at a wider point. There's more bulk to the iceberg here. And if we imagine our thinking, we're getting more into the intermediate thoughts. There's a different nature to these. These are maybe a little more firm. You might notice more absolutes. Thoughts like, people should do X, Y, or Z. If-then statements. If someone does X, then that means Y about them. In those two beliefs, in those patterns, you can hear the rigidity. You can hear they're a little more firm, a little more black and white. And our work is happening in the gray. We want to see if these black and white beliefs are accurate. We want to see if they're functional. We want to start to challenge them. At this point, we're at the widest portion of the iceberg. Where this goes, the rest of the iceberg goes. And that's important because we're talking about a top-down approach for a bottom-up issue. At the base of this iceberg are our core beliefs, and these are a little more difficult to access. We may not even get there in treatment. Working with your clinician, it's important, but it's something that's really difficult to progress to. These core beliefs, they tend to be about ourselves in an even more comprehensive nature, about our worth, how we see ourselves as a person, how we see others, how we see our ability to succeed, be competent. And if we look at these core beliefs, and we look at this iceberg representing our thinking, we all have some aspects of our thinking they may be dysfunctional or inaccurate to a degree. And this isn't saying we're thinking wrong, it's saying we all have times in which we think wrong, or we think incorrectly, or in somewhat flawed, irrational manners. And if we have some degree of irrationality at the base of that iceberg, beliefs about our worth, that we may not be worthy, we may not be competent, in moments in which things are going really well in life, those don't surface. But when we start to encounter stress, when we start to encounter difficulty, those really start to work their way up. They get into our intermediate beliefs, You notice those if-then statements. If I make a mistake, then I'm bad at my job. If I'm not kind, then I'm a bad person. And then at the top, in our automatic thoughts, I can't do anything right. Nobody cares about me. And you can see how this approach from trying to work our way down, top to bottom, helps us understand where some of those issues are in our thinking. And we're working to get to a degree of accuracy and functionality. That's the skill. CPT builds on this. I mentioned CPT as CBT on steroids. It's basically saying we're going to take this very intentional approach to every single one of these beliefs that we know is dysfunctional to some degree. And we may spend entire sessions on one specific belief. And we may not make a tremendous amount of progress. If we have a type of belief that tends to come from trauma, maybe one related to safety. I'm unsafe. I can't keep myself safe. The idea of challenging that and shifting that in one session, it isn't reasonable. So we start to chip away at it. We start to try to identify times in which we may feel safer than others. We try to identify situations in our life where we perceive a little more safety than others. We try to look at different times temporally. Let's go back 10 years. Did I feel safe back then? Did I believe I was able to keep myself safe back then? CPT really hones in on those beliefs, and it takes CBT to that next level. Now, I mentioned EMDR, and I want to make sure that you get a comprehensive understanding. That's not my place to provide, but please look it up or speak with your counselor. As far as prolonged exposure, this differs a little bit from the CBT-CPT approach, and you can hear it in terms of moving slightly away from the thoughts. There's not as much intentionality with the thoughts. We're focusing here so much on what we're feeling and trying to ensure that we feel it, we stay in that space, we don't avoid, and we allow ourselves to feel it till its culmination. We want any distressing, unpleasant emotions to be felt. We want them to dissipate slowly as time goes on. We want them to come down. We want them to decrease in intensity from staying in the moment, from pushing through, from mastery, rather than avoidance, rather than leaving the situation. That's where the beliefs start to change in terms of competence, in terms of believing that we are able to handle the trauma and starting to understand and know that we are able to handle the trauma.